phone was hacked
How
into.
do you deal with with the threats? Are you afraid? Are you afraid?
No. But I just don't want to get whatever. I'm not like out there or anything, but still, my phone was hacked. That was really scary. They broke into my phone. One of my websites was taken down with threatening messages and all that stuff.
Hi, and welcome to the Dayna Show, where we discuss in English day-to-day life of Israeli citizens, our concerns and aspirations for the country, and everything in between. I'm your host, Dayna Kaplan, and we're so glad that you could join us.
So before I start the podcast, I'd like to remind everyone that we still have over 100 of our family members who were stolen from Israel and who are hostages in Gaza. And what is the real kicker is that not only are they still there, but in order to get them back, we have to release murderers, convicted murderers out into society, not necessarily in Israel, but these people are convicted criminals, terrorists. So we will do everything to get back our hostages, and we will do anything for Am Yisrael. And so on that note, I want to welcome a very special guest, Josh Hasten, who not only is a true warrior and defender of Israel, but lives and works in the conflict on a daily basis. Thank you so much for being here, Josh.
It's an honor to be here, and I really, really appreciate it. And you've done a great job. You have a beautiful studio, and it's my pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much. Josh, you are, for those of you who don't know, Josh is an international correspondent for major news networks, including Fox, BBC, CNN, and the list goes on. You also work in Israel as an independent correspondent and for different newspapers, the Jerusalem Post, JNS, the Jewish News Syndicate. You have your own podcast called Israel Uncensored and a radio show. The list is just going to go on and on and on. You have several NGOs, one of them which I really love the idea, Regavim, where you ensure the responsible and legal land use in Israel. You're part of Yesha Council. Josh, first of all, I'm almost losing my breath saying all the things that you do. Two questions that come up right away. First of all, how are you? How do you juggle with all of these things at once?
So first of all, I for the record, some of those organizations and affiliations are things that I've done in the past.
Okay.
So some of them I'm not involved with from a professional perspective, but there's so much overlap in the world of Israel advocacy and public diplomacy. So a lot of the people who, Regavim and the Yesha Council, these are people who are my friends and I interact with and I get information for them in order to broadcast and to report on what goes on in the world. In terms of your question, you just have to juggle it. And each and every day when we were even scheduling, myself to come in, things are so fluid. There's no way to know what's going on day to day here with the situation right now, especially after October the 7th. There's no way to know. So I really, I'm old school. I keep a yoman, a daily planner with pen and paper. Okay, I don't have it on the computer or whatnot. And all day long, it's writing things in and crossing things out and scheduling here and there. Last night, for example, I was planning on just sitting at home and watching football for 3 hours in front of my TV and just chilling. And then I got a call from JNS. And they have us on all these news channels in order to try to help get the truth out and explain the situation here in the Middle East. All of a sudden, I got a call from Sky News Australia via the PR person, and they want me to come on at 9:45 at night, and I'm trying to watch the game. So that's all I wanted to do, but I couldn't say no. It's Sky News Australia. I'm not going to turn down that opportunity to try to get some sort of truth out there. And just before I went on, they showed a horrible, horrible video clip. I couldn't believe it. Just terrible anti-Israel, one side of the narrative showing what happened in a recent raid in a village near Shechem, where the IDF went after a horrible terrorist And unfortunately, there was a woman in the crossfire who was killed. But these are, whether it's Hamas or the Palestinian Authority or any of the other terrorist groups, these are people who hide, just like they do in Gaza, using human shields when they carry out their attacks or whatnot. So the whole report was focused on this family and how the IDF allegedly was fighting terrorists when this incident happened and a woman got caught in the crossfires. But I know the incident, and the IDF was going after horrible, horrible people. And they did kill a few terrorists. This just happened a few days ago. But the reporting was terrible. So on one hand, I was thinking, do I get on the show and do I just say, by the way, your report just now, was absolutely horrible? Or do I take the high road? And when she asked me, I know you just saw the report, can you comment on it? So instead of saying your news is terrible, you guys are one-sided and anti-Israel and biased, I simply said, well, I just saw your report and, you're accusing Israel of these things and whatnot. But, 80% of those who live under the Palestinian Authority support what happened on October 7th. And I know this operation, I've been following the news, and this was Israel going after the terrorists, and civilians who are used as human shields sometimes get caught in the crossfire. But whereas the IDF and our brave soldiers on all fronts, on 7 different fronts, target the terrorists, these people use human shields and put their own women and children on the front lines time and time again. And I think that is a major point here in terms of the narrative, in terms of what's going on right now. And it's just mind-blowing when you see these useful idiots on campuses in the United States and in different places around the world, in Canada, and now anti-Semitism is the new in thing in Australia. How they are basically, they're working as the spokespeople for Hamas, whether they know it or not. Hamas is sitting back and laughing and enjoying the fact that these 18-year-old kids...
They don't have to do anything.
No, they just sit back, and these 18-year-old kids are doing the work for them on Twitter, on TikTok, on Facebook, on Instagram, on all these platforms. And
I want to get back.
Crazy.
I want to get back to the Hasbara.
Okay.
But I want to start from the beginning, and I want to talk about where you were born.
Okay.
What your experience was growing up as a Jew in Chutz La'aretz, and what the catalyst was for you to make Aliyah.
Sure. So I'm from Indianapolis, Indiana, USA.
Indiana.
Yeah.
Ooh,
Not
okay.
many Hoosiers here in Israel. I probably know all the Indiana people here. And I grew up in a traditional household. I wasn't Sabbath observant, but we were very traditional. Mm-hmm. And it was a very Zionistic household. The local day school in Indianapolis, the teachers were Israeli teachers, were shlichim, were emissaries who came from Israel. So they taught, even though my Hebrew today is still a work in progress. I mean, I'm here since 2002.
That's why I wanted to ask you.
Yeah, 23 years. I get by, but it's still a work in progress. But they actually, they taught us Hebrew, Ivrit b'Ivrit. They taught us Hebrew in Hebrew, as opposed to, friends who I've met along the way who grew up in New York and some of these other cities who had, their teachers were rabbis or whatnot who were Americans. So they were learning Hebrew from fellow Americans, whereas these were Israeli teachers.
I had the same thing.
Yeah, and I think it's a huge advantage to have those types of people in your lives, whether it's Hebrew, whether it's Zionism, whether it's understanding the real meaning behind the holidays. Hanukkah starts, in just a few days. And I was at actually a Torah class the other day, and the rabbi was talking about how if people actually knew what the message of Hanukkah was, what the true story was behind Hanukkah, the whole woke society, the Jews would stop celebrating. If they actually understood that this was a war, this was a battle, the few defeating the mighty or the many. And it's a celebration of a military victory as they tried to blot out Jewish culture and Jewish religion and Jewish society, forbidding Jews at that time from keeping the commandments.
Isn't that amazing how we have so many chagim, and most of them revolve around us winning a war? We have so many victories, and yet people are still after us without shame. They're still after us. They think they have a chance, but they don't. You don't have a chance.
Nothing's changed. I mean, just look at what's going on in the parshiot that we're reading now. I mean, going back to Egypt, I mean, these were some of the first anti-Semites who we're going to read now coming up in a couple of weeks, how a new Pharaoh came into power and he, forgot, so to speak, all of the contributions which Joseph and the people of Israel gave to their society. And you can see that throughout basically every country in Europe and around the world. Jews thrown out, all of a sudden they say, what have you guys done for me? What have you done for me lately? And the countries, despite years of so-called coexistence and getting along and everything the Jewish people have brought to the table, it's like it never happened. They forget about it and they turn on their Jewish communities. And,
You know what? I look at the trials and tribulations that we have, the anti-Semitism, the wars and everything, as almost like a blessing. It's our responsibility. Every generation has a responsibility, and I've mentioned this on a few other podcasts, of taking care of Israel and taking care of Am Yisrael, our nation. And people might look at this as a curse, but I look at it as a positive thing. We have this responsibility to take care of Israel in the best way that we can. It's a zchut, it's a merit for us to be taking care of this country. That's why I look at you and I'm really in awe of the work that you do, because not only do you live in a very conflicted area, but this is your life's work. So I want to ask you, we met about 20 years ago in the
it's been a
football
while.
scene.
Yes.
And I've watched your career, since then. I've watched you on all the different platforms. I'm really in awe of the work that you do. But I want to know, first of all, how does it affect you personally to be involved in such a conflict? And like you said before, it's almost like an uphill battle to be working in Israeli Jewish advocacy. How do you think that your voice makes a difference during this time?
So yeah, it's definitely an uphill battle. And, in terms of numbers, I mean, how many Jews are there in the world? We're 1.1%, I think, of the entire world's population. So you're always at a disadvantage, especially when you're in the realm of public diplomacy. If you see how many Arab countries there are in the world, or Muslim countries, or anti-Israel, haters out there. And we do have our friends, let's be clear, the United States is a great friend, regardless of who is in the White House. The U.S. as a whole, the American people are friends of the state of Israel. But it's difficult, it reminds me of that image. And I don't know if it was ever verified. There was an image back, Hitler, Yamach Shmo, Hitler, he was giving some sort of speech in front of a huge crowd of Germans, of Nazis. And then they're all saluting him. And there's that one man who's sitting in the crowd. You know what I'm talking about, that image?
Yeah.
He's sitting in the crowd. And again, I don't know if he fell asleep. I don't know if he wasn't paying attention. But everyone, I guess, spins it as if, he's the one in the minority who wasn't going along. Perhaps, and I hope that individual, in fact, that's true, that he wasn't going along with the Nazis and what they were doing and the hate that they were spreading. So again, even if we're in, the minority, or at least it seems that, if you go on social media and see all the hate out there, just because you're in the minority about something, that doesn't mean you're not right, okay? So, every resolution I'm thinking about in the UN General Assembly or whatnot, you see so many countries voting against basically Israel's right to exist, and you can spin it any way you want in terms of the specific resolution, but they're basically saying, we are voting now, basically saying you don't have a right to exist. And this, X amount of countries, it's always like 190 countries vote, for the resolution. And then you have the United States and Israel and some tiny little islands are voting with us. Just because this takes place and you're in the minority doesn't mean that you're wrong. And that's the way I feel in terms of these battles. From a practical perspective, if you have, and I've always talked about this before, I've taken journalists on tours in different areas, specifically in Judea and Samaria. And there are three types of journalists and I think people out there in the world. There are those who are with us, or with the Jews, who believe that this is our ancestral homeland and we have the right to be here. And whether it's a journalist giving us fair coverage, Fox is fair and balanced, or whatnot. You have those people, too few and far in between, unfortunately. Then you have those who are absolute haters, those who absolutely want to see the destruction of the state of Israel. They wouldn't mind if the Jewish people were turned into fish food, as the Arabs wanted to do in 1948, and said it explicitly when they invaded us in 48, they were going to turn us into fish food. And then you have a group in the middle, and they don't really understand the situation here. And I've seen this, for example.
Even after they come visit?
So I've seen this with journalists who literally, their boss drops them off, says, go to Israel. They drop them off here. I remember a conversation I had with a journalist on Emek Rephaim in Jerusalem, a popular street in Jerusalem. And she was asking me, is your bomb shelter ready? If Iran drops a nuclear bomb on Israel. And I'm thinking, a bomb shelter, where we're in here, a bomb shelter is not going to help you if there's a nuclear bomb dropped on Israel. In other words, she had no clue about what was going on here. She didn't understand the reality. And I think those are the people that really need to be targeted. Those people in the middle who don't really understand, whether it's a journalist, whether it's just somebody sitting and watching the news and taking in garbage from a lot of the mainstream media. Those people in the middle who you can try to reach and make them understand. You can side with Hamas and be one of these useful idiots on campus and stand up for terrorism and call for the river to the sea and globalize the intifada and all their other slogans, which is really what they're saying is, let's murder more Jews. That's really what they're saying. And they can join those people, or they could open up their minds. And again, it's few and far in between. Some of these actors who've come over recently, some of these radio talk show hosts who've been in Israel and have come and seen the reality for themselves and have gone and visited the South and have seen what happened and saw what happened on October 7th, or have gone up to the Lebanon border and seen the destruction and the damage and got to meet Israelis and understand what we're living with here on a daily basis. And got to learn a little bit of the history and our rights to be here, whether it's from all the way back in the Bible or whether it's modern international law. They always say, you're illegal occupiers and you don't have a right to be in certain places under international law. They can come here and learn the truth. Those people in the middle, I think that's where we have to do a better job and reach out to those people who are undecided, so to speak. You have undecided voters in elections. The people who are undecided and just don't get it, don't have enough education, I think they should be a prime target.
I want to know about you.
Okay.
I want to know what about you made you start this endeavor and go on to this journey of Hasbara. Because when I met you, a while ago, I'm sure that you were involved in different things, but to make it your life, what was it that motivated you to do that?
So in 1997. I was working for the Jerusalem Post in New York, but I wasn't involved in editorial. I wasn't involved in writing for the paper. I was selling ads. It was just a job I had after college. I had a connection, and here, you want a job? Didn't know anything about ad sales. I was a terrible ad salesperson. I don't know how many ads I sold. I did a terrible job, and I was really, really bored.
Okay.
But one thing they did have at the Jerusalem Post office in Lower Manhattan, they had a very, very extensive library, a lot of books on Israel. And they also had, I guess it's a courtesy, they had subscriptions, or maybe they were getting it in barter, to a lot of different newspapers from around the United States. And these newspapers would come in the mail. Back then, when you used snail mail and you got mail every day, they would have these newspapers delivered. And I just started reading. These papers. And there was one book in particular called Eye on the Media by David Bar-Ilan. He was a former advisor to Prime Minister Netanyahu back in the 90s. And he wrote a book, and it was actually, I think it was a column also in the Jerusalem Post called Eye on the Media, focusing on anti-Israel media bias. I read that book and I'm not a big book reader. I read that within a day or two, the entire book, and saw how the situation here is portrayed in such a negative light and is so misrepresented by the media. And something in me just turned. And at that point, Aliyah was still not, at least in my mind, in the cards. I wasn't, I was also chasing a girl, but that's a different story. And, and she insisted, we were going to go to Israel. And I was like, well, whatever. Okay, well, sure, whatever. And then I got even more into it than her because of the fact that I became educated. I understood what was going on here. I started, reading and understanding. And then I started writing. The first letter I ever wrote to the New York Times was in response to some terrible coverage about what was going on here in Israel. It was the first time I ever wrote a letter to the editor, and it was published in the New York Times the next day. So seeing that, I was able to accomplish that, one letter to the editor in the New York Times the very next day. Next thing you know, I was writing and writing and writing. It started with letters to the editor, and then I had more and more letters to the editor published in different papers around the world, trying to get Israel's side out there. And then from there, it became letters, from letters, then it turned into op-eds. And I wasn't a great English student in college. I went to Yeshiva University,
Me too.
Yeah, Stern.
I went to Stearns.
Solid, we share an alma mater. So solid B student. In high school, maybe even a C student in English. But I just started writing. And then just, progressed into Israel advocacy and reporting. And now with, the latest technologies, podcasting and videos. And now after this, I got to go home and go on one of the Fox News shows to talk about the latest about Syria and about Israel and about the Middle East. And things just kind of,
how do you deal with it that you're like always talking about conflict? Does it have any effect on you emotionally? Just to be involved in that heavy negative dialogue all the time.
So
how do you deal with that?
So I think I'm two different people. I think there's like the work me, and then there's the home me, and I'm able to separate those.
You have a family, your husband, your father, grandfather.
I think I'm able to separate the worlds. Meaning, when I'm not doing what I do, I'm actually very, very quiet. I'm very, very, I would say, antisocial, maybe to a fault. So I'm able to separate them. Work is here, home is here, and really keep those apart.
That's a gift, Josh. That's a real
Thanks.
gift.
I mean, I try. I mean, there's overlapping. I was just talking to you before about how my basement office is now being converted into a makeshift studio. So there is overlap because my physical house is now becoming somewhat of a studio. I mean, I've already on my own invested in some equipment just to do these broadcasts.
It's going to cut some of your time. It's so much
if I'm
more
able
efficient.
to do it from home in a professional way. But so that's physically in my house. But once the microphone is off, once the camera's off, once the radio's off, once the computer's off, I try to stay out of it. I mean, there's always, unfortunately, if you go to if you take a look at my Telegram, I'm subscribed to 100 different news sites, and my WhatsApp. Every few months, I have to delete WhatsApps because there's just so many different news groups that I'm subscribed to. I mean, it can really make you nuts. But I try to avoid going crazy from everything going on, and try to separate, work and home, and R&R and work. Good. And all of that. I try my best.
Balance. I'm all for finding the balance.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to, or it can make you crazy.
100%. One of the reasons why I was really excited for you to come is because I really want to get down to the situation in Judea and Shomron and Judea and Samaria. And I want to start off the topic by saying that when you look at a map of the Middle East, you almost can't find Israel. It's such a small, teeny country. And everyone who talks about peace in the region talks about giving parts of the country away. We've all seen how in Gush Katif, we gave away land for peace and how that ended up for us. Palestinians, they don't want land. They want us dead. They want death. They want blood. They want to get rid of us. So when it comes to Judea and Shomron, and the way that you fight for the land there and for the people to be there, it's extremely, extremely important. And I think that most of the people in Israel, and especially around the world, they don't know much about the significance of the area, why it's significant to Israel. And so I would really love it if you could do a little bit of a explanation, maybe a Yesha for dummies kind of thing,
Okay.
starting with the significance of Yesha from biblical times to today, and what are the conflicts going on in that region?
Wow. So how much time do you have on Judea and
we'll do a
Samaria?
concise-
Cut me off whenever. I mean, we can
Okay.
talk about this for hours.
Start from the beginning. What is the significance to the country?
Judea and Samaria, you're talking about the homeland, the heartland, the soul of the Jewish people from the times of the Bible till today. So probably around 70 to 80% of the stories from the Bible, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, took place in what is referred to now as Judea and Samaria. Just pick up any Bible. You're talking about the towns of Hebron, where our matriarchs and patriarchs are lived and are buried. You're talking about King David. You're talking about where I live in Gush Etzion, the prophet Amos. You're talking about Abraham bringing his son Isaac to Jerusalem for the sacrifice. Walking through Gush Etzion. You talk about 2,000-year-old, which you can come see for yourself. 2,000-year-old ritual baths, mikvaot, which the Jewish pilgrims used 3 times a year on their way to Jerusalem to give to go on pilgrimage to the temple in Jerusalem. They purified themselves on their way up to Jerusalem. So you have, it's the cradle of civilization of Jewish history is in front of you, and you can just go outside and see it, in the communities. They're always discovering new archaeological findings between the communities. So it's the original Israel. It's the original Israel. I mean, Tel Aviv is, the white city, which was built, with Jewish labor back 100 plus years ago. It's a brand new town. You don't have Tel Aviv. I'm not trying to put down Tel Aviv. You don't have Tel Aviv in the times of the Bible. If you're looking at the ancestral homeland, biblical heartland of the Jewish people, it all starts in Judea and Samaria. So that's first and foremost. In today's times, people throw out all of these words in order to besmirch our presence in Judea and Samaria. They talk about an occupation. They talk about they call it West Bank, a term that came up.
I wanted to talk to you about that also.
They came up with it in 1950 instead of using the term Judea and Samaria, which is over 2,000 years old. They have hijacked the narrative. I'm talking about the Israel haters and the PLO with the assistance of the KGB and the Russians or whatnot to create a Palestine, a place that's never existed in the history of the world. Tell me who a king was from Palestine. Show me what their coins were. Show me a distinct dialect or custom or whatnot. So it's been hijacked, and in the international community, they view, you mentioned Israel as a tiny, tiny dot on the map. So Judea and Samaria is an even tinier dot on the map. And those who would say we should give away these strategic areas, also from a security perspective. I mean, we are up on the mountains. When I left my house today, it was 50 degrees Fahrenheit, 10 degrees Celsius. When I got down here, it was 68 degrees Fahrenheit, just to show you,
It's much colder there.
We're up on the mountains, and we have a view of the entire coastal plain where 75% of the population of Israel lives, from Gadara to Hadera. And imagine, you saw what happened on October the 7th. You saw what happened in the 20 years prior with the thousands and thousands of rockets being fired on the state of Israel. Imagine if you had a group like Hamas or Al-Qaeda or ISIS or any of these terrorist organizations, if they were in control of the strategic highlands overlooking the rest of the country where our international airport is. And again, as bad as it is now, we have rockets flying in from, or being fired at us, I should say, from Yemen and from Iran and from Iraq and Lebanon and
Did
Gaza.
you guys get a rocket on Shabbat, the Shabbat?
No, but
Because we were in here on Friday night.
Yeah, we did not get a
Saturday
rocket, but I'm a light sleeper, so I heard
Heard the
it
booms.
both on Friday night and it was on, I think, Wednesday night, Thursday.
Yes.
Hearing the interceptions or the attempted interceptions, you hear the booms. Gush Etzion, the way it's situated, you hear everything. You hear the IDF attacking the terrorists and Hamas in northern
Yeah, 'cause
Gaza.
you guys are close to Gaza as well.
You hear that. You hear when things happen in the center of the country. So again, oh my God, there's so much to talk about in Judea and Samaria. But when I bring groups, I talk about the biblical significance, which I touched on. I talk about the security significance. I talk about our historic connection to the land of Israel. And one of the reasons we moved, we lived in Jerusalem for 9 years before we lived out there. Jerusalem was great. We had great friends. It's the capital, the eternal capital of the state of Israel and the Jewish people. So why would you want to leave and go somewhere else? But when you come to a place like Gush Etzion, you feel a connection to the land. I think like a physical connection that you don't feel, certainly, of course, not in the United States, but even more so than in Jerusalem, I would argue.
I have family that lives in that area as well. My boys served in that area in the army when they were in Sadir, also in Miluim. When I drive in that area, it scares me. It gives me a lot of anxiety. My sister tells me, "You're crazy. We're used to it already. It's such a beautiful." I feel like I'm guilty, and I think I represent a large part of the Israeli population. We're nervous to drive around in that area. And I want you to explain to us why it's important that we become more familiar with it.
So I think that...
And why is it like that?
I think it's because you're afraid of the unknown. You don't know, so therefore you're
Josh,
afraid.
There's a huge military presence there. When you drive there, you see along the road, there's a lot of military. At the bus stops, you see soldiers with guns. Why is it like that?
So to me, when I see that, that's definitely more reassuring. When I see that the IDF is there protecting us, I really think every part of this country has its issues. If you live in the north, and if you live in the north and you've lived for years under the shadow of the Hezbollah threat, so you're used to the shenanigans, and I put that mildly, shenanigans of Hezbollah. You're used to that. If you live right next to Gaza, in those communities there, not even taking into account, I don't know how you can, but the horrible massacre of October the 7th, for years they were under rocket fire. There was attempted infiltrations. They had those balloons, the balloons which they lit on fire and sent over, which scorched so many thousands and thousands of acres of land. So each part of the country has its own challenges. So everywhere, where you're in Jerusalem, I remember, 2015 was the so-called stabbing intifada. And on a regular basis, when things are tense, Jerusalem, you have stabbing attempts around the old city or on the eastern side of the city. So the residents of Jerusalem have to deal with their local hostile populations. And in Judea and Samaria, unfortunately, one of the realities ever since, I would say, the first so-called intifada, I don't like the word, since 1987, where the Arabs decided, as a result of the PLO, instructing them to go out and start throwing rocks at Israeli motorists and soldiers or whatnot. It started with that, and then it moved on as a result of the failed Oslo Accords. Every single place in this country where Israel has turned over land for promises of peace have become terrorist launching pads. And one of those places, you remember, first it was Gaza, then it was Jericho, turning over authority to the PA. Any place that's gone over to their hands has become a hotbed for terrorism. So in our reality, you have areas A, B, and C, Area A under PA control, under Area B under joint Israeli and Arab control, and Area C, this I'm talking about in Judea and Samaria, under Israeli control. In all these areas, you have Arabs who go out on it's still a daily basis. Every time somebody throws a rock, I get a notification on my phone because I'm part of the just one of the groups I'm on. So there is a daily threat there of rock throwing, of Molotov cocktail throwing. But
How
I
does
got
that
to
make
a
you
point.
feel? Are you afraid?
I'm definitely not afraid. You don't think about it. You really don't think about it.
Why is it important?
It's normal just to get in the car and drive. I mean, you can talk yourself into, statistically speaking, the chances of me getting hit with a rock are so tiny with hundreds of thousands of people passing this juncture every day. That being said, personally, my car got hit by rocks with my front windshield smashed back in 2017, 18. And at the same time, I was in a very, very dangerous situation in 2015, October the 7th, I believe, 2015, where I was driving to Jerusalem via the road via Tekoa, which is a community in eastern Gush
I was
Etzion.
there.
And
During the day or at night?
the morning, about 8 o'clock in the morning. It was the first rain of the season, so a lot of traffic to Jerusalem on the main road. So I went around, and all of a sudden there were a few cars stopped on the right side of the road. I thought somebody was having car problems. I didn't know what was going on, so I kind of passed them slowly. And I looked to my right, and I saw approximately 30 Arabs with cinder blocks
Oh, wow.
running on the road from their village, towards the main highway with cinder blocks running towards my car. And
Wow.
yeah, so you have, the whole fight or flight thing, fight or flight response. I mean, it's real. You have like 4 or 5 seconds to decide what you're going to do. So I carry a gun for safety, and I encourage all Jews to carry a gun wherever you are, whether you're in Israel, whether you're in Australia, whether you're in New Jersey, doesn't matter. Jews need to learn to defend themselves and protect themselves. And that's one of the reasons, by the way, going back to my childhood, we had karate as an after-school activity from 4th grade on. We were taught Jews must defend themselves. And this is Indianapolis, Indiana. We were taught Jews must defend themselves. So, I'm a very big proponent of Jews owning guns and being able to defend themselves. To make a long story short, 30 guys are running towards my car, again, back in 2015. Instead of doing the smart thing, which would be to drive away, I decided to stop, which was not the smart thing to do. It's not what you're supposed to do by the book. And I opened the door, I got out of the car and showed them that I was armed, and they kept coming. So I fired one round over their heads to back them off and kept going towards Jerusalem. What I didn't know was an attorney, a woman from Tekoa, was just there a few minutes before, and they managed to surround her car and try to pull her out of the car and try to murder her. Like they were trying to murder her. And she had to go to the hospital, and thank God she was okay. She managed to escape, like push the guy away, shut her door, go in reverse, whatever it was.
So you're not giving a very good incentive for people to come visit Yuda V'Shomron.
So that's one reality. And that's one reality. But 99%, let me be clear though, 99% of the time, things are quiet and things are calm. And maybe you want to even edit that story out. I don't know.
No, of course not. That's part of the reality.
That is the reality. People need to know that. On the other hand, again, like I said, you have hundreds of thousands of cars passing every day without incident. But unfortunately, you do have some of these neighbors who are hostile and take it out on motorists. And that's just our reality. Again, right now, Israel's on a war on 7 different fronts. And as I said, I'll state it clearly. Every single Jew living in Israel has their own challenges, whether it's you having to run to a bomb shelter repeatedly because you live in the center of the country, whether it's the people in the north who haven't been home in over a year plus, 60 to 80,000 people not in their houses because it was too dangerous. October 7th, which, devastated entire communities on the southern border. Every one of us has our challenges. And Tel Aviv is a challenge, and Jerusalem's a challenge. But even with all of that, and even with my incident there, I won't be deterred. And anywhere that I can go with my car, you can't go into Area A. It's closed off to Israelis. There are those big red signs, which we put up, by the way, saying it's too dangerous to go in. And that's a big, it's very, to me though, that's extreme. That's so shameful. We made these sacrifices for peace. We got on this path, a path of peace with Oslo. And ironically, when we went down that road, things got worse. It used to be that, Jews used to go into the shops in Gaza City on a Friday, or into Bethlehem, Beit Lechem, and shop and drive through there. The road used to be through Bethlehem, through Dahisha, the Dahisha neighborhood in Bethlehem, to get to Gush Etzion. That's when we didn't have peace, so to speak. Now that we have peace, and I'm being sarcastic, of course, that we've made these gestures and turned over land and brought back the PLO from the dead, things got worse as a result. And then you had the second Intifada in 2000 with over 1,500 Israelis murdered. And then you had October 7th as the direct result, years later, but a direct result of the pullout. So again, I'm not trying to scare anybody. And, I don't take chances, meaning I wouldn't drive into Area A. I wouldn't do something that was illegal or dangerous. Going into areas reminds me of the soldiers in 2000, those two soldiers who made a wrong turn, ended up in Ramallah and were lynched. Yeah. And by the way, I think just in the last year, I think we got the mastermind behind that. I think we killed the evil person who held his hands up with the Israelis' blood on his hands. We got him.
Can we talk about 1967?
Sure.
When we won that land from the Jordanians.
Yeah.
Okay. Why is there a controversy about the land from that perspective if we won it fair and square?
Yeah, we won Judea, Samaria, Sinai, the Golan Heights, and Jerusalem was unified back in 1967 in a defensive war of survival. The problem is, it is something that we did internally. We did not immediately apply sovereignty to those areas. We decided we're going to hold these areas as bargaining chips for any type of future peace deal. And the mistake was actually made in the midst of the Six-Day War. As we were winning this miraculous war, I know of a story. I don't remember his name. He's like a big rabbi, lives in the old city. He fought, I interviewed him for the Jerusalem Post years ago. He fought in the Six-Day War. I think he was with the paratroopers. And unfortunately, he had the job of recovering the bodies of those soldiers who were killed. So here is this soldier, and he's very sadly loading up bodies of soldiers killed as they're making their way to Jerusalem, or the old city of Jerusalem. And he's asking his commander, where should they be buried? And he's suggesting we should take them to the Mount of Olives, Har Zeitim. It's the oldest Jewish cemetery in history. And the commanders were telling him, in the midst of the battle, in the midst of the Six-Day War, we're telling him, no, don't go to Har Zeitim. Go to Har Menuchot, because that's on the western side of the city. In other words, the leaders were already preparing for a reality where even parts of Jerusalem were to be used as a bargaining chip eventually towards peace with, a fake peace with our Arab neighbors. So I think the onus is on us that we did not right away say, the Golan Heights we did in 1981 officially annex them or put our sovereignty over the Golan. We didn't do the same thing with Judea and Samaria. Sinai we gave back to Egypt in a peace deal. So holding these strategic areas, part of our historic biblical heartland, holding them out like this and saying, we're willing to divide these areas sends the wrong message. When you send a message of weakness, this is the Middle East. I say this all the time. When you send a message of weakness, the Arabs do not respect you. They step on you. It's part of the culture. This isn't the U.S.-Canadian border here. This is the Middle East where strength wins out. Look at Iran right now. Iran is shuddering right now because Israel is showing strength against Iran. President Trump, whether you like him or not, when President Trump is coming into power now, and Iran is shuddering. They just lost Hezbollah, basically, their proxy. They lost Hamas. They lost Syria. An entire country just fell. Who would have thought October 7th, they carried out a massacre. They murdered 1,200 Jews. And here we are 14, 15 months later, and we are the only source of stability in the entire Middle East. Who would have thought after such a devastating blow, we're the ones standing, and Iran is shuddering. I read just yesterday, they don't even have enough gas. They have to make decisions on do they heat people's homes, allow them to heat their homes, or use it for their power plants or whatnot. And they have to make these decisions. They are reeling right now. A result of our strength.
In my ideological view, I look at how this country was formed after the Holocaust, after one of the worst tragedies that happened to the Jewish people. And now that we have Israel and we have this huge conflict because of the war in Gaza, I think that not only is Israel going to bring peace to the Middle East, but it's going to bring peace to the whole world. And it's going to send a huge FU to the entire world who was against us and tried to slander our name, that we're going to be ending up being the light into the whole universe. That's the way I feel about the situation, because what things look like on a day-to-day basis, there's a bigger plan. Maybe it's because of the way that I believe or whatever, but I really feel like Israel is going to change the trajectory of peace and terrorism in the entire world. What do you think about that?
When you say that, you sound like a messianic, right?
Yeah.
And the thing is, that's a good thing. Yet, in this day and age, unfortunately, really unfortunately, amongst some of our own people in our own country, to call somebody messianic is a slur. It's a dirty word, okay? But that's not. It should be the exact opposite. It should be taken as a compliment.
I am, as a regular Israeli citizen, I've had my boys fighting in the army. I have neighbors whose kids were killed in the war. My son has a friend who's a hostage. Bar Cooperstein, he's still a hostage. I'm very in touch with the reality of what's going on here on a day-to-day basis. It doesn't mean that I don't feel the anxiety, but I like to look at things that there's a silver lining at the end of this. And if the silver lining of the Holocaust was the state of Israel, I'd like to look at this situation that something very positive is going to come out of it. So if I sound messianic, maybe, but I'm also optimistic. I'm optimistic for the country, and I'm optimistic about the truth. And I think that you are also. I think that you also really fight to show that what's going on here is the honest reporting of what's going on here. That's our reality. That's the reality that we are part of.
100%. It is a long road. It is a long road. And we've been down this road for literally thousands of years. And in every generation, Holdor Vador, we say it on Passover, every generation someone has popped up their head and have tried to kill us, ever try to wipe us out. There is no exception, including this generation, the October 7th generation. We just had the Holocaust 80 plus years ago. Every single generation, they've tried to wipe out the Jews, and we're still here. It does not make any sense logically how we're still here, how we're the only nation that survived.
Why won't they leave us alone?
They'll never leave us alone. It doesn't matter. All these, I don't want to be pessimistic, all these attempts at, combating anti-Semitism. And I'll go back to what I said before. I don't think you're going to succeed in wiping out anti-Semitism. I don't think that's possible. It's in the DNA sadly, in the DNA of every generation of a different group getting up and trying to wipe us out. And that's why I think it's so important that Jews have to learn to protect themselves, because this is the sad reality. And thank God, to be optimistic now, we have a state, we have an army. This is something that our parents and grandparents and great-grandparents dreamed about and never thought they would see Jewish boys and girls in uniform with guns, protecting, as horrible and painful as you said October 7th was. You want to call it a strategic failure, whatever you want to say about that. But at the end of the day, we're still here. We're a source of stability. We're fighting back against those who want to destroy us. And
we're
it will
the
take
only
time.
we're the only democracy in the region.
We're only a democracy, and we will succeed. To make a long story short, in terms of what you were saying, definitely even with all the pain, there's reason for optimism and hope. It's not something you can explain with logic. The fact that we're still here after all this time, with when the Roman Empire is gone, the Greek Empire, the Persian Empire, you take your pick, they're all gone. They're all finished, and we are still here. 0.001% or whatever it is of the world population, even though you wouldn't know it if you just went on to Google and saw, what is it, 70-80% of the stories of what's going on in the world are focused on Israel. They're ignoring massacres in Africa. People are being, whether it's the Sudan. I mean, you had 500,000 people who were killed in Syria. When was that ever talked about in the news? The Congo, take your pick. All these other crises going on in the world, the situation in China, the situation in North Korea. People are infatuated with us, for better or for worse. They're infatuated for us.
We're so popular.
We're very popular.
We're
for
very,
better or for
very
worse.
popular.
For better, sometimes it's not good to be popular, and they take it out on us. But there's no doubt in the history of the world, this is the best time to be alive as a Jew, to be able to have our own state, our own army, with all of our flaws and all of our issues and all of the things we need to do better, need to do right, holding on to land, needing more soldiers. You can make all types of justifications and reasons why things aren't as good as I'm now portraying them to be. But think about things 80 years ago. Think about the times of the destruction of the temples, or the Crusades, or the pogroms, or any other time in history. We have the ability to defend ourselves, whether it's with weapons, whether it's with the pen. In any which way, we have that ability. That's something that we didn't have. We're able to speak up for ourselves, and that's why it's such a special time.
The Jewish voice will never be squashed. We will always have a voice.
Absolutely.
Even if it's the only single voice in the crowd,
That's
we
right.
will still have it. I want to go back to Yesha for a second.
Sure.
Yehuda Shomron. I want to talk about the names of Yesha, of Yehuda, Shomron, Judea and Samaria. And I want to talk about why the term West Bank is looked at as a derogatory term for us.
So again, this area from the times of the kings of Israel, these areas were called Judea and Samaria. Jews are from Judea. It is the most natural thing in the world. Jews are from Judea. Arabs are from Arabia. It makes sense. If an Arab is honest with you, Arabs are from Arabia, Jews are from Judea. That is what this area was called. In 1948, when Jordan joined in the war, again, to turn us into fish food, and lost, they're the ones who maintained an illegal occupation of these areas of Judea and Samaria. And they decided they're going to rename them the West Bank, meaning the West Bank of Jordan, Jordan's West Bank. So from 1949 to 1967, there was not one Jew living in our historic, ancient, ancestral, biblical homeland. Israel, we talked about it, Israel won a defensive war of survival in 1967, and we returned home already in Gush Etzion in September 67. They started rebuilding the communities that were destroyed by the Jordanian Legion and the locals back in 1948. So it's a make-believe term, which was created as a means of propaganda to delegitimize our rights to those areas. The same way the term Palestine is used now to delegitimize our rights to all of Israel. As I said before, again, before 1948, the Jews here, they were called Palestinians. There's never been a Palestinian state. There was a mandate for a place called Palestine, which was a term brought in by the Romans in order to spit in the faces of the Jews 2,000 years ago. They renamed the area. It wasn't a country of Palestine. It was a name because there were Philistines who lived here, unrelated to today's Muslim Arabs. Islam was not founded for 400 or 500 years afterwards. It was a term to degrade the Jews. They named it Palestine. And after World War I, where the actual colonizers, the British and the French, sliced up the Middle East into all these different regions, The British were responsible. They had a mandate for what was called Palestine, not a country. It was a British mandated Palestine, and the goal was to establish a state for the Jews, and that's what they were supposed to do. That was their mandate for this area, including Judea, Samaria. That was always supposed to be part. And slowly, the British, first of all, created the Hashemite kingdom of Transjordan, which is today Jordan. They chopped off already at the beginning, already in the 1920s, 78%, and created an Arab entity there to try to pacify the Arabs. And the remaining 22% was supposed to be designated as the future state of Israel, including Judea and Samaria. So that was the plan. And then subsequently, since then, you had the General Assembly resolution in November of 1947. On one hand, positive towards the establishment of a Jewish state. They made that recommendation, but that did not include Judea and Samaria. And then as a result of the armistice lines following the war in 1949, Judea and Samaria were on the other side. They were on the Jordanian side. So Jordan carried out this illegal occupation. And that's when in 1950, they decided we're going to rename these areas. We're going to call them our West Bank. And unfortunately, not only do the people who are uneducated or don't recognize our rights to this area, but you even have news outlets here who refer to these areas as the Gedera Maravi, the West Bank. It just, every time you say it, every time it's used, anytime you use the word Palestine, which refers to Narnia, because it's never existed as a state, anytime you use those terms, you're giving you're giving credence to those who are using the propaganda war against Jewish legitimacy here in this area.
So why do the Palestinians dispute the borders from the 1967?
Their dispute is they don't recognize the state of Israel in any borders. I mean, it's not, if you listen to Hamas and what they say, not only when they attacked Israel on October 7th, but every previous conflict, you go back to the war in 2014, and there was one in 2012, 2009, all these different mini wars, if you will, with Hamas. If you listen to what they say we are attacking the settlement of Sderot. So when people say the word settlement, a word also I don't use, normally it refers to the communities in Judea and Samaria. They attempt to, it's derogatory. But listen to what our enemies are saying. It's not always important what we're saying. Listen to what our enemies are saying. Hamas calls Sderot a settlement. They call Haifa a settlement. They call Jaffa a settlement. They call Akko. They call all these places where Arabs lived before 1948. They refer to all of that as a settlement. They refer to Israel as one big settlement. A lot of our enemies won't even use the word Israel. They'll call, Hamas doesn't say Israel. They say the Zionist entity. Iran doesn't say the word Israel. They call us the Zionist entity. So, that is where their head is. They don't recognize our rights to 1 inch of this land. It's not about Efrat. It's not about Bet El. It's not about Shiloh. And if you're not familiar with these terms, these are the ancient Jewish cities in Judea and Samaria. When they're talking about, a so-called return to Jaffa, to Akko, to Haifa, to all of these places in, pre-1967 Israel, or mainland Israel, if you will. That's really what they're talking about. You just have to listen to what they're saying in the media, listen to what they're teaching their children. They hate education.
I think people are waking up now. Regular Israelis are waking up now to the fact that it's not about Sderot. It's not about Metula. It's not about Yeshar, Yehuda v'Shomron. They want the whole thing.
When they say the river to the sea, they say it. They say it.
Leaving militarily Yesha is not going to solve the problem, because that's just step one. They want to squash the whole entire country until we're not here.
When you see these college kids chanting from the river to the sea, they're talking about the destruction of the state of Israel. It's that simple.
Is the river they're talking about the Jordan River?
The Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. Right. They're talking about the whole country. So, that is, you have to listen to really what they're saying. And you got to listen to what our enemies are saying. And they're talking about the whole thing, the whole shebang. They want Israel to be destroyed. And these people are anti-Semites who are hiding themselves,
Or they're
disguised
just
as anti-Zionists, or they're
They're
idiots,
just
or they're idiots.
You know, I see all of these things on social media, and I'm looking at these clowns wearing the kafiyas and holding the signs. They don't even know what they're talking about. You ask them which river, what sea, they don't even know. You ask them any kind of question about Israel, they've never been here, they don't even know what's going on here. How can we even take those clowns seriously? Why are people taking them seriously?
Well, this is part of the whole so-called, woke mentality. And the narrative has been painted as if Israel is the oppressor, the colonizer, fighting against these freedom fighters who, the image of the little boy with the rock fighting the Israeli tank. And that is what has been ingrained in their heads, a lot of times by their professors on campus who are spewing lies in terms of the reality here and sharing their false narrative. So they think it's cool to side with the underdog. And who's the underdog in their demented, warped, or uneducated view? Hamas. They're the underdog somehow. That's how it's been portrayed. And again, their PR machine has been full steam ahead ever since the PLO was founded, back in 1964, 3 years before Judea and Samaria were in the hands of Israel. So you're telling me that they created an organization to liberate the occupied territories of 1967? Yeah, so why were they founded in 1964, before Judea and Samaria were in our hands? Because their goal is the whole kit and caboodle, the entire country. And they want Israel destroyed. Again, we do have, the Abraham Accords, and we do have normalization with, or on the verge of normalization, at least perhaps with Saudi Arabia and these different countries who have opened their eyes.
We are going to bring peace to the Middle East.
No, for sure. So again, I'm not saying it's everybody or whatnot, but when you have a population in your midst, 80% of the Arabs who live under PA control said that they support what Hamas did on October 7th. It's very, very difficult. But again, I'm not here to be the bearer of bad news or to be scary or whatnot. On a daily basis in Judea and Samaria, you don't see any of this. You go about your business, and there's Gush Etzion. People are at, even with a war going on, by the way, the cafes are packed, and Friday morning the shops are packed. And people are out, and we have a mall and restaurants. And
my mom takes a bus there almost every Shabbat. She's like, it's a beautiful view. I love it. I love driving.
It's tranquil.
Here.
It's peaceful.
Really beautiful. And I'm like, Mom, I couldn't do it. She's like, I love it here.
Absolutely. You don't think twice when you live there, when you know where you're going, when you know the area. When you recognize, again, I know I painted, shared that story from 2015, but that is really the exception.
Listen, it happens there, but it's happening in the Merkaz. There are piguim all the time, terrorist attacks all the time. They've been terrorist attacks at the Mahsom here on the way to Modi'in.
Yeah.
It's not just in your area. Unfortunately, now it's all over the country. You just happen to have a very strong, large concentration of Palestinians living in that area. I want to switch the focus because I know that you're a really busy guy and you're going to have to get going.
Yeah.
But I want to switch the focus because I read something very interesting the other day about how Gaza has received hundreds and millions of dollars, mainly from different relief funds around the world, but primarily from United States. And they say that the Palestinians are not receiving this money, that Hamas is blocking the money. My question is, if United States knows that Hamas is giving the money, they're in essence just giving the money to Hamas. And you said before how America is our friend. But I say, there's this Mishnah that says, Ein kategor na'aseh sanegor. A prosecutor cannot be a defendant. You have to take a side, right? Whose side is America on?
The American people are on the side of Israel. The American people are on the side of Israel. Certain administrations are not on the side of Israel. Certain administrations, including the current administration, has withheld essential arms from the state of Israel. They say they want the war to be done. They want a ceasefire. They want things to finish up. They said not to go into Rafah, not to go into Rafah. If they wanted a more precise and a quicker war, the most logical thing to do would be to give us the precision missiles and other military equipment that we need in order to finish the job faster, to prevent civilian casualties. And yet they did the exact opposite by withholding weapons from us, from saying not to go into Rafah. That essentially means leave Hamas afloat, which is a detriment both to Jews and to the Arabs who live in Gaza, who live under the brutal, tyrannical rule of Hamas, which steals, as you said, their humanitarian aid. All of these trucks which go into Gaza, which Israel provides, and you can argue, by the way, what other country supplies an enemy's civilian population with humanitarian aid at the time of war?
You don't see Russia sending aid into Ukraine.
Can you imagine in Nazi Germany, the Allied forces sending in, parachuting in humanitarian aid to the German people in the middle of World War II? So Israel has gone above and beyond, you could argue unnecessarily or ridiculously, in order to essentially, what you said before, keep Hamas afloat, because Hamas ends up stealing the aid. People who get near the aid trucks get shot. Hamas hijacks all of the material, what they've been doing, as you said, for years. I mean, instead of building schools and hospitals, they've been using this money to bring in weapons. Originally, they were making their own weapons. Back in the days when it was just Qassam rockets being fired at Sderot, they were manufacturing them homemade. Now, shipping in or smuggling in the weapons from Egypt all these years. And the international community and the United States turning a blind eye, continuing to fund them, continuing to fund, the first Trump administration stopped funding UNRWA. That's the organization that's supposed to be helping the so-called refugees and their descendants. Yeah. But UNRWA is Hamas. I can't tell you how many times I've used that hashtag, UNRWA is Hamas.
100%.
Whether it's those who are directly involved in the October 7th massacre, whether it's UNRWA who essentially keeps the people there, the Arabs. They say they care about Muslims and Arabs in Gaza. They keep them there as pawns on the front lines. They don't give them any type of resettlement plan. They don't take them off the front lines. They hold them there as pawns, just like they do in Judea and Samaria and in Jerusalem, where you have these what they call refugee camps, which are basically neighborhoods. They hold them there as pawns. The symbol is the key. They warp their minds with this anti-Israel hate, telling them, just hang on, stay here. Eventually, we'll throw the Jews out and you'll go back to your homes. And the hate education in their textbooks, shows you who UNRWA is. In addition, as I said, those directly involved in the October 7th massacre. So these phony international humanitarian aid organizations, whether they're UN-backed or whether they're Amnesty or Human Rights Watch, complete phonies. 100% phonies. They don't do anything for any other, those who are really in need, around the world. You have different radical groups who are kidnapping women in different countries in Africa or whatnot. What was that whole Bring Back Our Girls movement or whatnot? When you had these Islamics kidnap these girls, was it Nigeria or one of these countries? I don't remember which country. Where were all these, humanitarian rights groups?
No riots, nothing.
No protests on campus, nothing. What happened just now in Syria? You had a whole regime overthrown. And again, obviously the Assad regime was evil within itself, but you didn't have anybody protesting about deaths in Syria as a result of the conflict or the rebel groups. No, over the weekend you had Turkish-backed militant groups in Syria killing Kurds. Just happened now. Where's the riot? Where's the protest? Where's anything? No Jews, no news. I mean, that's really the bottom line.
We came to the conclusion now that the current administration in the United States is funding Hamas.
The current administration is essentially, not directly, but
indirectly.
Whatever
if they know that the money is going to Hamas,
but then
and
again,
not to the Palestinians, then they're funding Hamas. The question is, the new administration coming up. You said Trump.
Yeah.
How do you think that's going to change things in the climate here?
First of all, just to go back to what you're saying, unfortunately, we're the ones bringing over the trucks into Gaza, so we're also culpable for the fact that we didn't set up a mechanism. If we really wanted to bring humanitarian aid, we didn't set up a mechanism in order to do it effectively and efficiently to avoid all this stuff going into the hands of Hamas. So I'm optimistic about the new administration because Trump is respected. It all goes back to the issue of respect in the Middle East. They don't like President Trump. Iran doesn't like President Trump, but the Iranians respect President Trump. And that is what you need in this region. It all goes back to a culture of strength versus weakness. And the strong are respected and the weak are stomped upon. So I'm optimistic. I don't know what, first of all, the statement the president made in terms of, give back, or, he said about the hostages now. He said, release them now or they'll be held to pay. And that's something, number one, the Biden administration should have said 13 months ago. That's something that we should have said, Israel should have said 13 months ago. Give us back our hostages, 24 hours, 48 hours, every man, woman, and child, give them back to us or they'll be held to pay.
Why didn't we do that?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I'm not downplaying the effective military operation and everything that we accomplished, our brave men and women accomplished, the IDF in Gaza, and essentially wiping out Hamas. It's still popping their heads up here and there. I'm not taking away from what our soldiers did there. But if we would have taken a stand, we're not giving you one truckload of humanitarian aid, not one drop of water, until you give back those hostages. I think it would have been completely different. I think the people there would have turned on Hamas and said, we can't live like this. Give them back their hostages. I think things would have been different. But for one reason or another, that's not how we operate. We have the IDF, we know, is the most moral army in the world. But sometimes you can be too moral to a point where it looks immoral, okay, where you're sending humanitarian aid to an enemy population. So optimistic about what President Trump brings to the table. His record from the first administration stands on its own, recognizing Jerusalem, or I should say the U.S. recognizing Jerusalem, because we don't need anybody else to recognize. We recognize Jerusalem as our capital, but for the U.S. to move their embassy to Jerusalem, recognize Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights as being legitimate, recognizing the communities in Judea and Samaria are not illegal under international law. The Abraham Accords, everything that he accomplished gives me optimism. But at the end of the day, it all starts at home. We have to look in the mirror, and we are the ones ultimately responsible for our future and the well-being of the state of Israel. 100%. We can accept and appreciate those who are our allies and those who are our friends. I see Argentina is very friendly now to Israel, and all these other was it Paraguay just moved their embassy to Jerusalem? Guatemala, maybe, all these different countries. All these things are positive, and President Trump, is the strongest leader of the free world, being the head of the president of the United States of America. But it has to start at home. We are the ones who have to initiate, and eventually we're going to have to be. One thing we also learned from this war, October 7th, is eventually, sooner rather than later, we need to be self-sufficient in terms of arms, in terms of equipment that we need.
Self-sufficient, you mean separate from United States?
I'm talking about we can't get into situations like this where an American president says, if you go into Rafah, we're going to withhold arms, and then we're stuck.
You're right.
Why is there a ceasefire? Why is there one of the reasons there's a ceasefire now with Hezbollah that we didn't, achieve all of our objectives is the fact that we didn't have the arms to do so, because there was a hold on arms. That's one of several reasons, but one of them is we didn't have enough weapons.
When it comes to our security, we need to be in charge.
It has to be in our hands.
Because nobody cares about us as much as we do.
Yeah, and there are people there. There are policymakers and influencers. I'm not talking about just social media influencers. I'm talking about people who have, the ear of the elected officials of this country, and think tank individuals or whatnot, who are putting together these plans towards self-sufficiency, especially when it comes to the military and the weapons that we need. And a whole other topic is we need more soldiers, but that's for another day. But the bottom line is, my point is, it has to start at home. We cannot always rely on somebody stepping up for us, coming to our aid. The President Trump only has 4 years in office. In 2 years, there are already midterms. That could flip the House, it could flip the Senate. And then who knows who the next, I had a conversation with Eugene Kontorovich, who's a brilliant international attorney, law expert here in Israel. He said to me, I just interviewed him for something I was doing a couple of weeks ago. He said, we have to now think about what's going to happen, strategically think about what's going to happen in 4 years. What if Kamala Harris or one of the other...
We have to be totally independent.
Absolutely.
Of the United States.
Who knows who's going to be next down in the pipeline. So we have to get on it. It all starts at home. And that's really my point.
On behalf of myself, and I think a lot of people in this country, I want to thank you. I want to thank you for your voice, for your commitment to the truth, and for being just a warrior in defending us in this country and in the international level. Thank you so much for coming here and sharing your knowledge and explaining Yesha and everything. And I wish you so much luck and success, and to hear only really good things from you and for the whole Am Yisrael. Thank you so much, Josh Hasten, for coming.
I really appreciate your time. I appreciate that you built out this beautiful studio so that people can come and share the realities of living here in Israel. We didn't even get to talk about Aliyah. We could do a whole show on how important.
Come back again. God willing, you'll come back again.
Happy to come back again, and people,
or maybe you'll invite me onto your podcast.
Okay, it's a deal. It's a deal. I mean,
pleasure.
The Jews got to come home, and I don't want to. We can talk a whole hour about the Jews needing to come home. Come join us. It's a wild ride.
Join us.
It's a wild ride. Come join us. It's never boring. I'll tell you that. It's never boring. There's not a day that goes by.
Every day here is an
for
adventure.
better or for worse, it is never boring. And most of the time, I shared that horrible story what happened to me. But again, 99% of the time, it's for the better. So
life is a great adventure in Israel. Come join us.
Absolutely.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of The Dayna Show. If you like what you heard, you can subscribe to the podcast, like and share with your friends on social media, and rate us 5 stars. Don't forget to tune in next week, and we'll see you then.